All right, we've got two more issues briefly to come through, so stay with me because we do have some trivia later on. There's some great Levi's cards you could win, so hang in there. Our next issue that we're going to be discussing is mental health. As I started out at the top of this discussion, I said that mental health as a topic and a social issue has been top of minds of a lot of young people as well. I want to bring out John, who's with the JED Foundation, John McPhee. John and his crew at the JED Foundation have been instrumental in trying to open up conversations with young people around mental health. He is going to lead a panel discussion as well to talk about how do we communicate this important issue. John. Thank you.
Thanks, Derek. Thanks, Derek. It's my pleasure to be here and to introduce our panelists, starting with Amanda Qian. Amanda is Director of Content Strategy at Bustle Digital Group, one of the world's fastest growing publishers in modern media. Working with creators, BDG uncovers issues and stories that matter through the lenses of authenticity, inclusivity, and conversation. The result is the largest audience of any female-focused digital media company and the greatest reach of any millennial-focused site. Amanda oversees every company vertical: lifestyle, entertainment, beauty, fashion, books, news, and politics. Welcome, Amanda. And now to introduce Lina Renzina. Lina leads Creators for Good, the Ad Council's talent engagement program, which matches traditional and digital talent with the organization's purpose-driven marketing initiatives. Working with talent, these partnerships have reached millions to drive impact surrounding such important causes as suicide prevention, breast cancer risk awareness, and diversity and inclusion. Lina has spoken at industry events such as South by Southwest, VidCon, and Social Media Week. Her background in theatrical producing, marketing, and talent management is a testament to her passion for the arts, authentically reaching audiences through digital storytelling. All right, so welcome to both of you. I'm going to start by just sort of setting the stage about mental health and really focusing on young adult mental health. The first thing I'd like us to do is to think about what is mental health. I mean, what do we mean when we say mental health? And I'll direct us to the World Health Organization, which I think actually is a very good definition. The World Health Organization defines mental health as a state of well-being in which we know our capabilities, we're able to cope with life's normal stressors, and we can contribute to our communities productively and fruitfully in the ways that we want. And so I think it's a nice definition, right? Because it's not the absence of mental illness; it's a state of well-being. And so if we think then or ask ourselves, what does it mean not to have mental health, and what does it mean not to have a state of well-being? One answer to that, and it's a big part of it, is if we are experiencing a mental illness, as many people do. So we're talking about depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, etc. Which, and I'll get into this a little bit more in a moment, 1 in 5 Americans are experiencing at any time. Okay. In addition, though, to not be in a state of well-being also includes states in which we're not flourishing, right? Where we're just sort of getting by, we're surviving and in survival mode. So when we put those two things together, we're talking about a tremendous number of people. To talk for a minute now about the statistics, how many people are we actually talking about? Well, as I just referenced, we're talking about 1 in 5 overall people are every year experience a mental illness. But if we look specifically at young adults who are 18 to 25, that number has now reached 26%. It's 1 in 4 who are experiencing a mental illness every year. And really, heartbreakingly, more than half are receiving no care at all. Okay? And they're receiving no care in large part because they don't actually know what's wrong, they haven't been noticed, but also because we have structural access to care problems here in the U.S. Depression is the biggest piece of that, depression and anxiety. Depression alone, 14% of people between the ages of 12 and 25 last year had a major depressive episode, at least one major depressive episode. So when we think about all the people that are in that age group, we're talking about something like 7 million people last year, teens and young adults, experienced a major depressive episode. Now, that statistic in 2018 is 70% higher than the number of teens and young adults who experienced a major depressive episode in 2011. So the rates are rising very, very quickly, not just for depression, but for anxiety, for suicidal ideation, for suicidal behavior, and even for suicide. We're seeing really large growth rates. I will, though, just take a minute to put this in context. The rates, and as they're rising and as high and disturbing as that is today, they are still below the rates they were, and I'm specifically talking about suicide, in the 1970s and 80s. But what we saw in the 90s coming into sort of 2001 was a real drop. And now they've been rising, and now they're rising again fast. And the question is, what can we do? And we'll talk about it to bring them back down. The reasons are many. You know, the world today is very stressful. Young people are facing unreasonable expectations and comparisons, often putting them on themselves. The world feels very unstable. It's frenetic. The news is coming at us very, very fast, including extremely stressful and upsetting things such as school shootings, incivility, racism, prejudice, and this sense that young people have today that they're going to succeed or fail, that the result is binary, that there isn't a lot of range. And I myself believe that's directly tied to rising income inequality. And what makes some of this so difficult in this work is that there's truth behind some of these challenges, right? This isn't like it's made up. These stressors are real. We're also seeing some real changes, such as today's young people are more sleep deprived than any previous generation. They spend less time outside than any previous generation. They're carrying more debt than previous generations, right? So there are real challenges. What do we need? Well, we need more conversations about mental health. We need people to feel more comfortable about seeking help, and we all need to be part of a culture of caring where we are checking in with others, asking them if they're okay. We're help giving. In the mental health space, we talk a lot about help seeking. Help giving is critical. And this is especially important that we bind together as a community because there just are, as I referenced, real serious structural issues. We don't have enough behavioral health care workers. We don't have enough clinics. If you're fortunate enough to be able to get access to somebody, a mental health clinician, there's a good chance they're not going to be somebody that's going to understand your problems or that you're going to identify with. And none of that even gets into the challenges around, can you afford it? You know, so real major structural issues. But what I want to say is that there is good news, because I feel like that was just a whole bunch of bad news to set the stage. But there is actually some very good news, and that is that today's youth are the most culturally accepting generation, and they really do want to talk about mental health, and they are talking about mental health. And in fact, I think for those of us who are older, I'm 52 and I have a 23-year-old daughter and a 25-year-old daughter, we have to make sure we're not bringing our legacy stigma to the table, because younger people really are not carrying the same kind of stigma. There are still barriers, challenges about that are preventing help seeking and help giving, but it's better than it used to be. And research shows that young people want to help their friends, and we know that they turn to their friends first when they're struggling. So I do think there's an opportunity here for youth to lead the way in mental health and take us into the future. So with that, let's get into this discussion and some questions. So Amanda, let's start with you. What role does the media play in encouraging people to seek help for mental health issues?
Yeah, that's a great question. So obviously the media is something that we all have on our phones, on our TVs, on our computers. We're always plugged in these days, so it's very influential. It's very, it's everywhere, right? So as a member of the media, we don't take that lightly in terms of, understanding the impacts and the influence that we have on all age groups, honestly, but especially young people, especially for where I work at Bustle Digital Group. So, we understand that people come to us not just or that it's important to provide content that's productive, not just that's like straight up health content that's very clearly servicey, but also just acknowledging that there's a opportunity to destigmatize and to open up the conversation around mental health in any kind of article or thing that you're covering. So even if it's a TV show, even if it's a movie or something, if there's an opportunity to have a productive conversation from it and to kind of pick something from there that like, hey, this is really important actually. This is what that director was trying to make a point about with this therapy scene or something. Like, let's talk about that. Let's do a whole article about it. That's like really important to our mission, and I think is increasingly important to other publications as well, which is great, I think. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you. Lina, how have you found the right talent to work with, in this work?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that some of what you've said about like the peer-to-peer is so important. And then as we found with talent, influencers, digital creators, they have this really intimate connection with their audiences. Their audiences feel like they're sort of a friend to them. They're creating this access. They're constantly talking to them. There's even like this new tool where you can now text your favorite celebrity. And so they have this intimate connection with them. It's really been about having, using their platforms and leveraging their talents to tell their stories about mental health. And from that, we really want to find the authentic connection to the issue. So through Seize the Awkward, which is our suicide prevention campaign with JED Foundation and AFSP, really focusing on 16 to 25-year-olds and that upstream messaging of mental health awareness, breaking down the stigma, starting those conversations, encouraging young adults to talk about mental health with their friends and also acknowledge when their friends are struggling. And we've done a lot of work with talent, creators, and musicians for that campaign. Music has been a really big part of the campaign this year because I think we found it was such a universal language for a lot of the young people we were trying to speak to. And we wanted to tap into the cultural zeitgeist, the moment where the talent was really popular and they had all the spotlight on them and they used it for good. And they used it for this amazing moment to tell their story and to reach out to their audience to start conversations about mental health. So really, going back to the question, it's about the authentic connection. A lot of the artists that we worked with this year had a story they wanted to tell. They wanted to talk about mental health with their audiences, and we helped them do that responsibly and sensitively on their channels. Because as with media too, there's that responsibility of doing it the right way. And we want to make sure that they know how to talk to their audiences and provide them the resources to be able to help their friends or to see signs when their friends are struggling. I think we have a video from one of our really high-profile partnerships this year talking about mental health with Billie Eilish.
The main thing I'm trying to say is that you have to listen. Starting that conversation, you don't have to make it super serious right away. You say, how are you feeling? Like, are you okay? That's what, say, are you okay? Ask somebody. That's what they, and yeah, I'm good. Really? Are you actually good? It's been like that for me. There have been certain people that have texted me right when I needed to be texted, saying they loved me and that they were thinking about me. And sometimes you don't even have to say anything to someone. Sometimes it's about a hug. Obviously, I am not a trained professional in anything. I don't know what I'm doing, but I have seen it, and I've been it, and it really means a lot.
It's really great. Amanda, let's talk about ways the media can be responsible in their mental health coverage.
Yeah. Again, like I said, we don't take it lightly that, people read us and we want them, we want to be responsible through that. So it's honestly a lot of just making sure that we take that burden upon ourselves as journalists and as editors to make sure that we are not perpetuating stigma, that we are being productive in everything that we do. And that involves a lot of consultations with nonprofits, with organizations, making sure that we are using as inclusive language as possible, as destigmatizing language as possible, including that we have the most recent up-to-date, boilerplates at the end if you need help or resources, including the crisis text line, for instance, or the suicide prevention hotline. We do regular consultations with these nonprofits to, a couple times a year just to make sure that we're doing everything right and being as responsible as possible. And in addition, even if there is a big, news event, so say, a celebrity takes their own life or something like that, and we know that we have to cover it, but we want to do it in a way that's responsible, but, we'll actually meet and have a meeting and talk about the right way to do it. So that's something that, for instance, we do, and I think and I hope other newsrooms are doing that as well, but that's just one thing.
Yeah, incredibly important. Lina, what's been the recipe and I guess the ingredients for the most successful partnerships with talents and influencers?
Yeah, that's a great question. A lot of them are in our amazing Seize the Awkward campaign, and we've really been privileged to work with some of the most amazing artists and creators and celebrities. And I think the secret sauce is really making sure that the creative speaks to the talent. Whether we're asking the talent to make something on their channel without our resources, or we're producing something like we did with Billie, it was really authentic to her and making sure the talent has a voice in what the creative is. And I think partnership is really important too. So even that word of, does the talent feel like they have a say in what's happening and how they're being portrayed and what the partnership is going to look like and how it's going to launch and when, and they really want to feel like you're sort of in there with them and that you're considering everything that's happening for them publicly and leveraging moments in time that they have a song being released or an album. I know that it was really important to some of our artists to include their songs that talked about mental health in the creative. So really trying to find the sort of 360 ways that we can feel like the partnership is mutually beneficial for both parties.
That's great. Yeah, thank you. Thinking about those that do want to promote mental health, influencers and creators, do you have any advice for them, in terms of how to approach that and what calls to action, they should be aiming for with their audiences?
I'll go first. So advice, right?
Yeah.
So think first about what is needed, right? Like, what is it that you are, like, what is the resource that's not out there? What is it that people are having trouble trying to wrap their mind around, or what is the barrier to getting that help that they need? Like, what is that? Once you identify that, then you kind of know what to do, right? You know kind of who to ask for help, or who is doing a good job of that and who is not, and you can kind of go from there. So again, I would emphasize the doing your homework and really trying to research what the responsible way of going about whatever message it is that you're trying to share is, because your words have so much power and your influence is so much power. So that's obviously going to be step one, no matter what.
Yeah, I think responsibility is a lot of it. Doing your research, talking to nonprofits in the space, going to seizetheawkward.org for those tips. But also, I think last year we sort of saw what was happening on the internet. Some creators that were sharing irresponsible content, and we saw that as an opportunity to bring together talent and influencers who cared about the issue, wanted to talk about it, but maybe didn't know how to do it and wanted to do it the right way. So we actually had an amazing event last October, a mental health summit with creators to give them the tools to talk about mental health with their audience, because it is so personal. It is a lot about sharing their stories, their struggles, how they're going through their work. A lot of them are experiencing burnout just because of the really high, intense pressure and standards that are put upon them. And so even having them talk about it and talk about burnout with their audiences and how they're navigating that has been so beneficial, and all of the responses and feedback they get. And then I think just even the simple things of how do you start a conversation about mental health, and how do you see that your friend is struggling? So really arming yourself, if you're a creator, with the tools to talk about it the right way with your audience, of course through the lens of your own personal story or journey, whether you or a friend has been impacted.
That's great, thank you. So I have to throw a question out, I guess, to the organizers, just to see if, I'm not sure how to check for audience questions. But as we just do that, or if I get help on for that, could we unpack that just a little bit more in terms of advice specifically, and this is what Seize the Awkward is about, for those situations where you are concerned about somebody else? Really, how do you approach that kind of a discussion?
I mean, I was actually at that summit last year, and it was awesome. It was fantastic, and we did a piece for Bustle that was kind of like how to broach
Right,
that
that's
conversation
right,
with your
yes.
friends. And it's really a matter of listening and being like, I'm here for you, and I'm here to listen, and I'm there, and it's not about casting judgment or trying to solve the problem or anything like that. I think I talked to at least 5 or 6 people at that event, people who did really want to make it a priority to share their stories on their channels, but do it again in a productive, responsible way. And every single one of them, that was their number one advice, is like, just be there for that person.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And I think also some of the signs that, your friend hasn't been acting like themselves lately, or, you keep inviting them out, but they just want to stay at home. So really even preparing yourself and understanding, like, in my friend circle, what are things I should look out for to even start a conversation or to check in with the person. I think always checking with your friends too, to make sure, is there a reason that you haven't been out for the last 2 weeks? I just want to make sure you're okay. I think it's a lot easier maybe than people have it in their head to check in with friends and to really make it a priority to make sure that everyone's doing okay. And if they aren't, like Amanda said, being there for them and listening and not comparing yourself to them, not saying, oh, well, I also feel like that, or say, oh, it's going to get better, or anything like that. Just validate their feelings. And
Yes.
if it does come to a moment of crisis, also know that there are tools out there to help the person.
Yeah, and I would just add, because sometimes these conversations can feel so difficult and awkward, hence the name Seize the Awkward. But really, if you come from a caring and an earnest place, and you're really checking in with the other person and asking if they're okay, you're only going to do good. As we approach just our last couple of minutes here, are there any other advice that you have for the final thoughts for the audience?
Yeah, I mean, in general, like, I just want to make it clear how important it is that we are kind of normalizing that we are able to talk about this, and that it's not something to hide. And like you were saying, I think this new kind of younger generation is like embracing that more and more, which is great. I also have siblings who are around that age range, and it's true. And I think honestly, like, access is just kind of the biggest issue right now. It's like they know it's like something's off, or I need to do something, or I want to get help, but like how exactly? How can I afford it? So I think the next step, honestly, and the part of the media and part of everybody really is like, okay, so if we are trying to unpack this right now, then what's next? How can we then get you the help that you need, and how can we kind of make that more accessible?
Yes.
Yeah, I think also just when thinking about talking about mental health on your channels, like we've been saying, just do all your research and make sure you're doing it the right way, because if you want to do good, if you want to use your platform to talk about something and raise awareness, then you really have to do it the right way. And I think, the idea of using social media for good, because I'm sure some of the issues are also because social media and we're inside, on the computer a lot.
Yes.
And that can become really toxic, and maybe just understanding how to walk away and then use your channels to follow things that you really love, and positive channels, and not, that neighbor or friend who maybe you have negative feeling toward. So really using social media for good, whether you're a marketer or an audience member or a creator, celebrity, and figuring out what works for you.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with both of you. I think it's, the 2 tracks, like let's do more of this talking and conversation as individuals and communities, but also use the models from the discussions we heard earlier about creating a movement that really will move our government to invest in the infrastructure and the access to care that just so desperately needs to be improved in this country. Well, thank you both for this discussion.
Thank you.
Yeah.